The gods envy us. They envy us because we're mortal, because any moment might be our last. Everything is more beautiful because we're doomed. I'm author Angel Miller, and that was a quote from the 2004 movie Troy with Brad Pitt. If you're interested in religion, spirituality, self-development, I'd encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. But this week I want to talk about this quote and what it might mean for us. Now, on the surface, it would seem to be perhaps a rather blasphemous quote, saying that the gods would envy a man. But sometimes in religion, we do find things that appear to contradict the religion and even to be a little blasphemous. So in Sufi Islam, for example, although in Islam, the drinking of alcohol and drunkenness is prohibited or haram, in Sufi Islam or Sufism, the mystical experience, union with Allah, residing in Allah, is often described in terms of drunkenness or likened to drinking wine, which would be much more shocking in that tradition than, say, in Judaism or Christianity. In Hinduism, of course, in Tantra, you have the notorious rite of 5 M's, where the participants partake of certain prohibited substances such as grain, alcohol, and meat, and engage in sexual conduct with a member of a different caste to themselves. And this quote, I think, however, is probably most like the Buddhist conceptions and most like the Buddhist tradition. However, in Buddhism, you have this idea that although the gods have far superior powers to man, it is only man that has the potential for enlightenment. And perhaps it is because we live in this world of impermanence, of death, of disease, and of constant change, and the potential to sink down lower than where we are, or to raise ourselves up to some degree. And according to Buddhism, of course, to raise ourselves up to the point of enlightenment or awakening. Now, in Zen Buddhism, there is a particularly blasphemous sounding phrase which is well known, and that is the phrase says, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha. If you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. Now, this obviously does not mean literally to kill someone or to kill an enlightened being. Rather, what it means is if you meet the Buddha on the outside, a statue or so on, a temple, some kind of representation of the Buddha, the rituals itself perhaps, this is not the Buddha nature itself that has to be found within. The Buddha is within. And so the idea is to kill the external forms, or at least attachment to the external forms, and to dwell within oneself to realize enlightenment or awakening. Now, this statement from the movie Troy, and of course it is only a movie, but this idea that the gods envy us, and they envy us because we're mortal, and because everything is more beautiful because we're doomed. Nevertheless, I think it does give us some kind of pause for reflection, and does, in a similar way perhaps to Sufism or Buddhism, is a kind of shock that can awaken us to some kind of truth. And if we consider this statement seriously, although it's a poetic or an artistic work, it seems to suggest that for one, that there is some kind of relationship between the gods or the divine and man, and one of our sort of unique or special aspects is, in a sense, our disadvantage, and that is our mortality, something that we would prefer not to have. But being mortal, as with any disadvantage, can have some benefit aspects or some kind of advantage. And of course, when we recognize and acknowledge our mortality, then we can think about how we really want to spend this limited time on this earth. Do we want to waste our limited time watching TV or doing things that we find really not fulfilling on any sort of deep and meaningful level? Do we want to associate with people that kind of drain on our time and a drain on our energy? And I think when we ponder our mortality, the answer is a much more clearly a no, that we don't want to waste our time on things that we find objectionable or depressing, or that don't benefit us and don't really allow us to express our innermost nature. And we don't want to waste our time on people that are really draining our time and draining our energy. So one of the more important aspects of recognizing mortality is that it can focus us on what we do want to do and what we do need to do in life for ourselves. And this is a reason why in the religious traditions there is this emphasis on death very often, or within spiritual traditions there is often this symbolism of death, of mortality, of the philosophical death, the skull and crossbones in various traditions, or the skull or the corpse, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, or the Hindu sadhu meditating on a grave, or in a graveyard where there might be scattered body parts or corpses around, and so on and so forth. All in a sense pretty horrific to think about, but nevertheless something that can push us forward into our own true direction. And I don't want to dwell too much on it. This is a short video, but let's just think about this idea of beauty as well, this idea of impermanence and mortality making things more beautiful. And in a certain sense, beauty and death go together. Beauty we would associate more with women and with the feminine, and death more with men and with the masculine, these being more to do with life and with death. And certainly when we have a sense of our impermanence, of our mortality, things can appear more beautiful, more profound, and more meaningful. For example, children, when you see a child, you might be more aware of your own mortality, that you're not going to be here 50 or 100 years from now, but there will nevertheless be this continuation with others that come after you, and therefore what will you leave behind? Because when we are focused on ourselves and actualizing our own nature, it's not simply anymore for our own pleasure, but as a kind of inspiration that we can leave behind for others. Well, that's all I really want to say on this subject, but let's just think about those themes, that we are connected in some sense to the divine, which might be like us, or connected to the gods, that the mortality, although it appears to be this great weakness, can nevertheless prove to be an enormous benefit when we reflect on it, and then allow this to push us in a direction that we perhaps wouldn't go if we were to live hundreds more years or forever, or if we didn't think about our mortality and weren't aware of our mortality. And let's also not only embrace our mortality, but the beauty of life in all its transience. Thanks very much. I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.